When CBC inaugurated this forum in 2005, it was at the time when global attention was very much focused on Africa, which formed the centerpiece of the G8 agenda and was the subject of the Commission for Africa. A lot has happened in Africa since then. In retrospect, it has marked a significant period of global reassessment of Africa, in which awareness of the continent's economic potential has begun to overtake preoccupation with its perceived problems. I don't think anybody would deny that Africa still faces many difficulties and challenges. But 2 decades of economic and political reform have significantly adjusted the balance between the state, the private sector and civil society in most countries to the good. Economic growth has been steady. Of course, Africa has not escaped from the economic whirlwind of the last 12 months, but had been moving forward at a rate of around 5% per annum. And many new economic actors, particularly those from Asia, are very much now present in Africa. Tonight, we will be celebrating business excellence in Africa at the CBC Africa Business Awards. And I must say, there are a very large number of world-class African companies today, and many world-class companies with fully indigenized African operations. You'll meet a number of them tonight. It would have been almost impossible to have organized such a system of awards a decade or so ago, when the private sector was very much the Cinderella of Africa's political economy. 5 years ago, no one anticipated that we would be in the middle of one of the most severe financial and economic crises in decades. The impact on Africa is, of course, serious, with the IMF forecasting growth in sub-Saharan Africa at around 1.5% in this year, 2009, hopefully recovering to something just under 4% in 2010, but still below the pre-crisis level. The sharp drop in demand for commodities has impacted the continent. There have been significant reductions in capital flows available for key areas like infrastructure development and some disappointing trade fields. And Africa has probably fared worse amongst a number of the emerging markets. But I would like to just reflect briefly on the question about the implications of all this for the longer-term development of Africa. And I'd like just to register 2 brief comments. Is that the current and immediate problems need to be seen in the context of a much longer historical cycle. There has been a fundamental shift in our global society, where citizens living in market-driven economies are now, for the first time, a big majority. Contrast that to Africa at the time of independence, where the state was seen as the driver of development. The expansion of market economies has certainly not been without difficulty, and it's caused many dislocations. But it has begun to make a dent in poverty and underdevelopment, and offers the best, perhaps the only, prospect for creating wealth and sustainable development. The second is that leadership is more important than ever. When CBC was founded 10 years ago, we set out on a long journey to support investment and growth for the benefit of all, but particularly in Africa, where the majority of citizens in the Commonwealth who suffer low incomes and lack opportunity are to be found. So we must be careful in reshaping financial and economic systems, not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. The market, entrepreneurship and private companies are critical to establishing and maintaining sustainable growth. Much work still needs to be done by governments and business, working in partnership to create better conditions for growth, reducing trade barriers, improving infrastructure, creating a better business environment, and tackling poor governance and corruption. Your Excellency, you put the point well at the East Africa International Business Forum, which we organised together in Kigali in October last year. You said that while East Africa cannot control its own work and its own reforms, in short, the direction remains the same, even if the road is more challenging. While no one country can control the external economic environment, we can all have an effect on what happens in our own domain. This forum was conceived as part of the private sector input to the G8. In this context, we hope that G8 governments will keep to their word, and that those countries which are not delivering on previous commitments will address this. If not, the achievement of agreed international development goals will become impossible. A debate has shaped over the past few years about the role of aid in Africa. Some argue that aid has failed because there has been too little. Some argue the converse, that aid is counterproductive and creates failed economies and dependence. I'd like to quote President Kagame from your recent article in the Financial Times, responding to Dambisa Moyo's book, Dead Aid. You said, "As long as poor nations are focused on receiving aid, they will not work to improve their economies." As you have argued, entrepreneurship, trade and investment will bring the greatest success in reducing poverty and increasing prosperity. We need to go faster in implementing reforms, building public-private partnerships and making it possible for entrepreneurs, large, small and micro, to create jobs and develop the economy. The private sector is the main engine of growth and sustainability. But, as in every country, the development of infrastructure, human and physical, and building the capacity to regulate an economy well is critical to the viability of the private sector. Most African countries need support to achieve this. The G8 is an important international partner in this work and in realising the Millennium Development Goals. The private sector, including African businesses, also has a key role in helping to achieve the MDGs, and we are pleased that our Prime Minister Gordon Brown and the British government have been encouraging greater private sector involvement. While the development agencies have been engaging the private sector more, we believe that the private sector can play a much bigger role in development. We will be glad to continue the dialogue with DFID and the UK government on how this can be enhanced. For the foreseeable future, we need to concentrate on the private sector to lift growth, and everyone has an essential role. At the end of this forum, we will be presenting the text of a letter to be sent via the Prime Minister to the G8 at the forthcoming meeting in Italy, setting out our commitment as private sector leaders on these issues. I very much hope that many of you will join in sending that message. So with those brief remarks, let me welcome you all again today, and we look forward to another productive Africa Business Forum. Thank you very much.